Hello everyone, welcome to Cardboard Chemistry. I'm your host MTG Labman, and today we're covering my favorite multicolor cards from the upcoming Lorwyn Eclipsed set. That being said, let's get started. First card I want to cover is Bogart Cursecrafter. One black and one red, so Rakdos mana value for a 2/3 Goblin Warlock with Death Touch. And then whenever another goblin you control dies, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. I feel like goblin support is pretty good from this set. Wants to do a lot of sacrifice, a lot of aristocrat goblin strategies, and this guy just allows another way to ping your opponents for every time a goblin dies. So nice little solid uncommon that I think is a shoe-in for most Rakdos goblin decks. Moving on, Bree of Clan Stoutarm, 2 colorless and 1 red and 1 white, so Boros, legendary creature, 4/4 giant warrior. Pay 1 and a white, another target creature, and tap another target creature you control gains flying and lifelink until end of turn. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost if the spell's mana value is less than or equal to the amount of life you've gained this turn. Otherwise, put it into your hand. Now, this card is fun. You want to gain big chunks of life, and basically, I feel like you want some top deck manipulation with this card, because if you read it, until you exile non-land cards, so you're exiling cards, but it doesn't say after you exile those cards to shuffle them back into your library. So you are exiling, you are impulse drawing, and if you gain 10 life or something, you don't want to get to a point where you're exiling half your deck to find something. You want some ways to get cards back on top of your library, so you're going to hit what you want. You're going to probably run Sensei's Divining Top, Scroll Rack in this deck, just to make sure you have what you need closer to the top of your library, so you're not exiling utility pieces or removal or something or good components of your deck to the ability, because you only get to choose one of them. So strong card. I feel like it's going to be a powerful commander, but just build with caution. Next, probably one of my favorite original cards from Lorwyn is in a new version, though. Doran, Besieged by Time, 1, and then Abzan, so 1 white, black, and green. For a 0/5 legendary creature, Treefolk Druid. Each creature spell you cast with toughness greater than its power costs 1 less to cast, so reduces the casting cost of your high toughness creatures. And then whenever a creature you control attacks or blocks, it gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the difference between its power and toughness. So Doran's a 0/5. It doesn't have Defender, so it can attack. When it attacks, it becomes a 5/10 without any buffs. At a time I had a Doran the Siege Tower deck that ran very low power, high toughness creatures, and I can see this gives it a comeback. You get to basically swing in with something that opponents like, oh, this is a 1/4 or whatnot, and that 1/4 becomes a 4/7. So it's pretty powerful, especially if you're playing high toughness creatures. And I think all around a good a good creature. The only thing is running some removals that are based on power, because you'd have to run them in your first main phase. You don't want to run them in your second main phase because the buff lasts till the end of turn. So, where I'll choose any number of creatures you control with power less than whatever, and then destroy the rest, doesn't benefit you in the second main phase because your creatures are still buffed from Doran until the end of turn. So just keep that in mind. Next card I want to move on to is probably what I consider the most powerful commander, most powerful legendary creature that was released in the set. You've heard my initial thoughts. I've grown more positive on the set, but I still, because there's cards that I like, but I still feel the set overall did not give the spotlight that it needed to each creature type in Lorwyn. And while I feel like most elves, besides, the two that I covered in the top for green and black respectively, are kind of a letdown. But they did make up for it with a High Perfect Morcant, 2 colorless and Golgari, so black and green, for a 4/4 elf noble. When High Perfect Morcant or another elf you control enters, each opponent blights one, so they put a -1/-1 counter on a creature they control. And then you can tap 3 untapped elves you control, proliferate. You can activate this only as a sorcery, but I could see if it was restricted to Morcant, but like I said, elf ball players dump a boatload of elves onto the battlefield. Flourishing Defenses with High Perfect Morcant is an infinite combo, right? You are a board wipe. You create an elf, you put a -1/-1 counter on a creature that creates an elf from Flourishing Defenses, and then that triggers Morcant again, and it just goes on and on and on until there are no creatures on the board for your opponents to control. And it's each opponent. So Flourishing Defenses out, Morcant, 1 elf entering the battlefield, putting a -1/-1 counter on each creature opponents control, or a creature each of your opponents controls, gets you 3 elves, and that just compounds. So yeah, it's crazy 2-card combo deck. Super powerful. Not much else to say. And then the fact that you can proliferate counters, you combine this with old key cards from Hapatra, Vizier of Poisons, where you create snake tokens, Obelisk Spider, where a -1/-1 counter, opponents lose life, and it's just it's a very, very valuable very, very valuable card. Moving on from Morcant, we have Marlin, Fey Ascendant. So this is the new Marlin, 2 colorless and Sultai, so 5 mana value overall, for a 4/5 legendary creature, elf, fairy, noble. Flying, whenever Marlin or another elf or fairy you control enters, exile the top 2 cards of target opponent's library. Once each turn, you may cast a spell with mana value less than or equal to the number of elves and fairies you control from among cards exile with Marlin this turn without paying its mana cost. I've talked about this in my initial thoughts episode. This is a very powerful card. Elf Ball. I feel like elves got really good legendary creatures in their supporting pieces were okay. I don't feel like fairies were very well represented in the set. Giants, not really well taken care of. I wish Merfolk would have had some more powerhouses. And Kithkin, I like Bridget. I like Bridget as a commander, but it's not really Kithkin typal. But Marlin, you add the token production of elves and the token production of fairies. You combine that into a single commander. Casting the spell you can only do once a turn, but the exile isn't once a turn. So if you're pumping out 10 elves in a turn, you can exile opponent 20 cards. And then you can cast basically anything, right? Elves are really good at making tokens. Fairies are pretty good at making tokens. I said in my initial thoughts, this combined with like an Altar of the Brood, whenever a permanent enters a opponent's mill, like easily can mill out opponents by surprise, and then you're also stealing permanents. So really powerful commander. I still feel 5 mana value versus 4 mana value that High Perfect Morkant's gonna outclass it just a little bit more, but very strong card overall. Moving on, we have Tam, Mindful First Year, 1 colorless and a Simic hybrid, so 2 mana value commander, or legendary creature. 2/2 legendary creature, Gorgon Wizard. Each other creature you control has hexproof from each of its colors, and then you can tap her, and target creature you control becomes all colors until end of turn. So I like this card. I think it's kind of cool that, especially if you're running Simic, if you're running a lot of hybrid Simic, every creature you control has protection from blue and green. Or hexproof from blue and green, so you can still target it. Your opponents can't target it. And I don't know about this card necessarily being the lead of a deck. This I could see being very fun in like an Ivy Gleeful Spell Thief deck, where you're targeting your stuff, you're grabbing your opponent's stuff, because if a spell target's a single target, you can also copy that and target Ivy with it. But it also prohibits your opponents who are playing, white or green and blue, a Simic, prevents them from targeting any of your stuff, or your commander there. And then you could tap Tam, give Ivy protection from all colors, or make Ivy all colors anytime that they're trying to remove Ivy. The funny part is it's still targeting, the target fizzles, but I think you still get to copy the spell. So, fun card. And the last multicolored card I want to cover is Dread Tiller. 1 colorless and a Golgari, so 3 mana value total. When this creature enters, you put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. And then whenever a creature with a -1/-1 counter on it dies, you may put a land card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. So if you're a self-mill strategy, if you're -1/-1 counter, you can basically, if you have cards in your hand, or if you're drawing cards, and put a land in every time a creature with a -1/-1 counter on it dies. I think it's a really powerful ramp piece, especially in the -1/-1 counter synergies, -1/-1 counter synergies that we have in the set. With that being said, that's my summary of my favorite cards that are multicolored from the Lorwyn Eclipsed set. Please feel free to leave a comment. Let me know what you think, what your favorite cards are in multicolor. With that being said, I'll catch you guys on the next one.